This is Len Haderchuk. Thank you for listening to our Financial Lens episode titled Financial Strategies with Trusts. I have to first say I am not an attorney. I don't provide legal services. I don't give legal advice. I'm talking about a financial perspective and how we meet financial strategies with trusts. There are really two major types of trusts, a revocable trust or an irrevocable trust. We'll talk a little bit about them and how we'll use these different trusts for our objectives. With a revocable trust, we have three parties we want to consider. We want to consider the grantor or the settlor, the individual who funds the trusts. We want to look at the trustee who manages the trust, and the beneficiary, the individual who gets the benefit from the trust. Again, we have the grantor, we have the trustee, and we have the beneficiary. With a revocable trust or revocable living trust, the grantor, the trustee, and the beneficiary are all the same person. So the person who puts money into the trust manages the trust for that person's own benefit. With an irrevocable trust, we have those same individuals. We have the grantor, we have the trustee, and we have the beneficiary, but the grantor, the person who puts the money into the trust, is not the trustee and is not the beneficiary. The reason for that is because we want to look at a structure where the grantor does not have the ability to benefit from the trust. We'll talk about why that is in just a moment. But the point is the individual who puts the money into the trust, the grantor, has to rely on the trustee and the beneficiary to have the trust accomplish whatever the objectives are for the trust. So when we look at how we would use these trusts, there are two primary reasons why we would use one trust or the other. The first reason is to avoid probate. What is probate? Well, probate is a process that when someone passes, the courts decide if the will that was presented to them, or if there is a will, if it meets the objectives of the person who passed away. We can't take it with us when we pass away, and so assets that we own upon our passing, we have to leave to beneficiaries. There are three ways that assets pass to others. The first way, which trumps everything, is if you have an asset owned jointly with another individual, it will automatically go to that other individual if you have it titled as joint tenants with right of survivorship, where if one passes away, it goes to the other one. The other way that we can determine what happens to assets when we pass away is a contractual stipulation. These are typically arrangements we make with financial institutions where we set up beneficiaries on our investment accounts, our insurance policies, so we direct the financial institution what to do with that financial instrument when we pass away. The third way that assets are passed is by the will. So if assets are not jointly owned, if assets do not have a beneficiary stipulated, the will determine where that asset goes. Now, with a revocable or an irrevocable trust, when we put assets into those trusts, there's no question who owns the asset, the trust owns the asset. So if the grantor, the person who put the money into the trust or a property to the trust, passes, there's no question who owns that property or that trust, because that trust owned that money or that asset while the person was alive or when they passed away. So with either a revocable or an irrevocable trust, they both serve the purposes of avoiding probate if that asset is in the trust. Now, when we have a trust, we have to mention that there are some complexities with having a trust. It's not really a big deal, but you need to have a trust set up. You need to have the trust document presented to the financial institution. The trustee has to manage it in the role of a trustee upon the passing. The trust typically owns those assets, and so the trust document stipulates who gets those assets, which may be just fine, but sometimes it's easier if you have a asset that's owned by a financial, or it's placed with a financial institution, and the institution has a list of beneficiaries that they distribute the assets to upon the passing of the owner. There's not necessarily one better way than another way, except my experience is that it's easier to have beneficiaries on accounts. But one little stipulation, if you have a lot of different beneficiaries and you're prone to making changes on them, it's easier to use a trust document. So all your assets that you own go into the trust, and it's easy to make changes for all the beneficiaries with the trust instead of making changes with each financial institution. The biggest difference between the revocable and the irrevocable trust in terms of usage is creditor protection. Because if you have a revocable living trust and you are the grantor and you're the trustee and you're the beneficiary, it's very easy if you need to pay out some money to somebody, if you're in a litigation or if you go to a nursing home, to, as a trustee, take the money out, give it to yourself as a beneficiary, and pay the different expenses or the lawsuit that you're faced with. Well, the whole idea with an irrevocable trust is that we don't want to have our money go to plaintiffs if we get sued. We don't want our money to go to the nursing homes. So when we set up an irrevocable trust, we are not the trustee, we are not the beneficiary. If we are sued or we go to a nursing home, we cannot take the money from the trust and pay those obligations. The point of an irrevocable trust is separates you from your money so that your money is protected from these different expenses. With an irrevocable trust, you lose control of the asset and you do have to rely on the trustee and the beneficiary. When we have irrevocable trusts, they are the ones that provide asset protection from creditors and from nursing homes. There's only one caveat. For nursing homes and for long-term care protection, the asset has to be in the trust at least 5 years before it's protected from Medicaid spending. Thank you for listening to our Financial Lens episode titled Meeting Financial Strategies with Trusts.